What is up, everyone, and welcome back to a brand new episode of the 3&D here on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network. Make sure you hit subscribe below and follow our socials at the 3&D ETB and at ETB Network. On tonight's episode, we got jam-packed slate for you guys as Hunter Dickinson is headed back to Kansas. We'll be talking over a little bit of college basketball, checking out the transfer portal. A few more names have been entered. The deadline is going to be rapidly coming up this upcoming week. So we're going to be going over the guys who have entered the portal, some guys who may be entering it, some news around the league. D'Angelo Russell potentially opting out of his Lakers deal, the Hornets head coaching search, and then we'll be looking over each of the first round matchups as we've been doing throughout the playoffs. We got the first round matchups should be wrapping up this week, so it's going to be exciting. There's been a lot of exciting matchups that we'll be going over, and the New York Knicks knocked off the Philadelphia 76ers in a really close one on Sunday. Take a 3-1 series lead. We'll be going over that series too as well, so that's going to be very exciting. But first things first, we have a brand new sponsor here at the network. This episode is presented by Playback. Watching sports is more fun with others, but we spend too much of our time watching alone. Playback is a virtual space where communities can stream live sports together, with everyone perfectly synced up. Creators can hop on stage, deliver their own play-by-play analysis and commentary, and invite viewers up for Q&A. Playback makes watching sports fully interactive and a social experience. From playing fantasy sports, repping your favorite players and teams, and watching with commentators and communities you care about. Win or lose, sports are best enjoyed together. Join our community by going to playback.tv/ETB network to find out more, including our live stream schedule. This week we'll be having plenty of live streams with the NBA playoffs going on. We've been doing several games per week, so definitely stay tuned with that. We've got a jam-packed playback schedule for you guys as we team up with them here at the Empty the Bench Network. So jumping right into things, Hunter Dickinson is headed back to Kansas. So this news doesn't come too much as a shock to a lot of college basketball fans. He was a senior this past year. He has his 5th year of eligibility, and he's going to use it to go back to Kansas. He didn't have much of a draft stock. He's probably not going to have much of a draft stock in the upcoming years. His game doesn't really translate too much to the NBA, but he's a great college player. And after 3 great years at Michigan, he spent last year at Kansas as their star player, averaged 17.9 points, 10.9 rebounds, and 1.4 blocks last year. As Kansas's star player, pretty much. He was their second leading scorer behind Kevin McCullough Jr., who ended up missing some time last year, but he's going to be headed back. And just like we talked about in last week's episode, Kansas, this is just another tool to the highly anticipated season that the Jayhawks should be having this upcoming year. They have an absolutely stacked roster. DeJuan Harris and KJ Adams are both slated to come back. Johnny Furphy might potentially come back. He declared for the NBA draft, but we'll just be testing the waters. He might only be a second-round pick, so he definitely, I think, a highly likelihood that he ends up coming back. And on top of that, they landed 3 big-time transfers and a 4th just a couple days ago. They landed A.J. Storr, who was leading scorer for Wisconsin this past year and was a top 5 player in the transfer portal, regarded by many as possibly the best guy in the transfer portal this past year. He's going to be headed to Kansas. Riley Kugel, who was a top recruit from Florida, didn't play too much. He's going to be headed to Kansas for his junior year. And Zeke Mayo is going to spend his 5th year of eligibility at Kansas next year. He was from South Dakota State, was one of the better mid-major players in the country this past year. He's also headed to Kansas. And then they just got word a couple days ago that Alabama forward Rylan Griffin is also transferring to Kansas next year. So they have an absolutely stacked class. It's crazy. It did lead one of their top recruits to reopen his recruitment, as LeBaron Fillon won't be going to Kansas next year. He actually just committed to Alabama yesterday, so he's going to be going there instead. And doesn't come as too much of a shock to me, honestly, because he probably would barely play if he decided to end up going to Kansas next year. They just have too many guys on their roster. I'd be completely surprised if he even saw a bunch of playing time next year, and he definitely saw that. Alabama is a team that's losing a lot of guys. He definitely could get a lot more playing time there. They still do have their commitment from their 5-star recruit, who's ranked number 17 in the country, at Flory Badunga, who's a center from Indiana. They still do have the commitment from him, and they'll probably end up keeping that commitment. He's kind of more of a project, I think. And they also have Marquise Passmore, who was another top 100 recruit who they still have the commitment from as well. But LeBaron Fallon is going to be headed to Alabama instead of Kansas in a corresponding move. But Kansas is going to be completely stacked this year. I'd be absolutely surprised to see them struggle and I think that they're pretty much a lock to be the preseason number 1 team in the country, on barring any other big time transfers going to any of the other big schools. I would be extremely surprised if we saw any of that coming up. But Hunter Dickinson is going to be headed back to Kansas, and just gives Kansas another tool that they can use. And jumping over from that, our other topic in college basketball before we jump into the NBA, which will be the meat of this episode, the transfer portal. So the transfer portal is heated up. May 1st, which is this upcoming Wednesday, is going to be the deadline for the transfer portal to enter the transfer portal. And obviously, there has been so many guys who have entered the portal, over 1,000 D1 players entered the transfer portal as of right now, including walk-ons. And they're expecting several others to end up declaring by Wednesday. But May 1st is the deadline to enter the transfer portal. Then I believe May 10th or so is the deadline to either choose what school you want to go to or leave the transfer portal. That's what I believe is the deadline. So it makes things a little bit more interesting. Everybody's going to have to commit. We see a lot of guys, a lot of the big names too, still haven't committed yet, and haven't heard too much from them. But a few other guys have entered, and a few guys have committed. Jackson Robinson was a big name that entered the portal within this past week from BYU. Not a surprise at all. He also declared for the draft. He was a senior this past year. He won the Big 12 Sixth Man of the Year, was one of the best players off the bench. He was also their leading scorer, even though he came off the bench, but he was a star player for BYU. Obviously, Pope is now the head coach at Kentucky, so a lot of people think he'll either stay in the NBA draft or he'll play at Kentucky for his 5th year of eligibility if he wants to use that. That would be a huge pickup for Kentucky, a guy that they need. But speaking of Kentucky, they also have landed a couple of other transfers as they're trying to refill their team. All of their top freshmen that were going to come in next year from John Calipari have decommitted. A few of them have decided to go to Arkansas. Boogie Fland decided to go to Arkansas. A couple of the other ones as well have decided to recommit and go to Arkansas instead. So that didn't come as too much of a surprise. So basically, Kentucky has to completely reload their team. A couple of the transfers though that they landed. Amari Williams was one they landed a couple of weeks ago from Drexel, who was one of the best big men, 3-time CAA Defensive Player of the Year. Otega Owe was a guy they just landed a couple of days ago. He was a sophomore at Oklahoma this past year, averaged 11.4 points, 3.8 rebounds, 1.5 steals. He's a fantastic defensive player. But they're loading up with defensive-minded players after having a terrible defense last season, allowing, I think, the most points in the country out of any other team. They had an absolutely terrible defensive team last year. It was all offense, and now that Calipari's gone, they're trying to completely reload with some defensive players. They still have some offers out there too. Great Osabor, who's one of the top recruits in the country, who had a tremendous season for Utah State this past year. Kentucky is one of their finalists that they're waiting on. A couple of other guys as well. And so Kentucky's trying to reload their team. Another interesting one too, Nick Pringle who was a longtime player at Alabama, decided to go to South Carolina. Andrei Stojakovic, Pedro Stojakovic's son, who played his freshman year, who was a top 100 recruit, played his freshman year at Stanford last year. He chose California over North Carolina and Kentucky. So his finalists were Cal, UNC, and Kentucky. He decided to join Mark Madsen's team at Cal next year. Cal's landed about like 7 transfers for next year. They've got a pretty hefty class coming in of guys. So Mark Madsen is strongly trying to turn around that program. This past year, they had Jalen Tyson, who's probably going to be either late first or early second round pick. They had a couple of other guys too who were good. They weren't able to piece it together to make a very competitive team in the final season of the Pac-12. But Cal, I believe they're entering the Big Ten next year. With the Pac-12 completely going under. So Stojakovic is going to become their star player. And Pop Isaacs, who was the leading scorer for Texas Tech this past year, he will be leaving Texas Tech. He's only a sophomore, and he's going to be headed to Creighton next year. And that could be a huge recruit, as Creighton, Trey Alexander just declared for the NBA draft. So highly likely they're going to lose him. They're going to lose Baylor Shireman, who's automatically going into the draft because he was a 5th-year senior this past year. And those are 2 huge pieces that they're probably going to lose. Ryan Kalkbrenner could be coming back. He was a senior this past year, but he has a 5th year of eligibility. At the time of the recording, last night, Saturday night, was the deadline to declare for the NBA draft. And there's a few names that we're still looking for. Dalton Connect from Tennessee was supposed to be a top 10 pick. There was no word of him declaring. It'd be a complete shock if he didn't declare. He was a senior this past year for Tennessee, but he has a 5th year of eligibility. And on top of that, Tristan Da Silva from Colorado was another guy that they didn't get an official word from on declaring. So it'll be interesting to see when those guys come out. So transfer portal is alive and strong. This upcoming week is going to be a telltale week for the transfer portal. We'll find out everybody who entered the NBA draft. The deadline to enter the transfer portal will be Wednesday, and they have about a week left to declare where they're going to play next year, the guys who are in the transfer portal. So we'll see, get a lot of answers on that, and a bunch of college rosters will be much more in line for next season after this upcoming week. So jumping over from that, we got a ton going on in the NBA. And first things first to jump into is D'Angelo Russell set to opt out of his deal with the Lakers. So the Lakers obviously were down 3-0 against the Denver Nuggets. They ended up winning on Saturday to keep the series alive, bring the series back to Denver. They were able to steal a game in Los Angeles. The Nuggets obviously have a chance to win the series in 5 games at home now. But as of right now, the Lakers the season is still going on. It probably will not last much longer, but news came out before Game 4 that D'Angelo Russell is going to opt out of his $18.7 million player option for next year. There's a lot of scrutiny around D'Angelo Russell. He ended up averaging 18 points per game this year, shot 41.5% from 3, so didn't have a terrible season, but he was extremely inefficient in crunch time throughout the season. He has had some very bad games in this first round of the playoffs, trying to support LeBron and Anthony Davis as the third scorer. I mean, you also have Austin Reeves, you also have Rui Hachimura, so there definitely is a couple of other guys that they've kind of relied on in scoring, but D'Angelo Russell, I think, is paid to kind of be the third scorer, and he's kind of disappeared multiple times throughout the playoffs. There's a lot to get into about the Lakers. We'll get into that when we go over the Nuggets-Lakers series towards the end of the episode, but D'Angelo Russell set to opt out. I can't imagine he's going to make much more than 18.7 mil anywhere else this upcoming year, but I guess he's going to either bank on that or he's going to look for a better situation, as he's right around 30 now at this point of his NBA career. And it seems like his good years are pretty much behind him. His dominant years that he had with the Nets and a couple of years with the Warriors. Ended up going to the Timberwolves for a little bit and wasn't the same player, and it ended up going back to the Lakers where he started his career last year, and has just not been the same player. So the Lakers are in a very interesting situation with a lot of their guys. So it'll be interesting to see how they go about all of their contracts, and with D'Angelo Russell, what he ends up doing. But the news is that he's going to opt out of his contract. And the Lakers, I mean, have plenty of situations that are going on. LeBron can opt out of his contract. People are going to wonder if LeBron's going to retire. Is he going to follow Bronny James if Bronny decides to stay in the NBA draft? Is he going to stay put with the Lakers for one more season and have like a farewell season? There's a lot of questions that are going to need to be answered for the Lakers this upcoming year. And jumping over from that, the Hornets head coaching job search has been red hot, and one of the more interesting names that kind of circulated this week is JJ Reddick. So JJ Reddick obviously retired a few years ago. He's been working as an analyst for ESPN for the last several years. And after the firings of Jeff Van Gundy and Mark Jackson, JJ Reddick has become possibly the top NBA analyst for ESPN. It'll be interesting to see what NBA Finals group they put together along with Mike Breen this year. But JJ Reddick is highly likely to be one of the color guys for that. They love him. He's been on First Take many times. He's been on a bunch of different shows several times. So he's definitely, and he's been doing his own podcasts. He just started a podcast with LeBron James. He's been doing a lot of NBA stuff. So he's fully immersed himself into the sports media scene. And the news came out that the Hornets interviewed him for their head coaching job. This just screams similar to the Steve Nash situation, how practically you didn't have any word that he was even considered to be the head coach of the Brooklyn Nets, and then all of a sudden you got the alert that Steve Nash was going to be the Nets head coach. This is it. This kind of seems like a very similar situation, the JJ Redick thing, kind of out of nowhere. The Hornets interviewed him. I don't know how the interview went. There was no kind of word on that. We don't know if the Hornets are even very serious about bringing in JJ Redick, or if it's just kind of like a facade, just to, pass off a coaching search on him. And Nick Morganson definitely helped me out with that, with the A team. So Mike Breen, Doris Burke, and JJ Redick are supposed to be the A team for the NBA Finals. So JJ Redick is highly regarded in ESPN. It'd be very difficult to imagine that he would leave everything that he's kind of like started with sports media, his podcast, all that kind of stuff, to be a head coach. He has no coaching experience. He hasn't been an assistant at all. He went right into the media once his NBA career ended. So I really don't anticipate that being too much of a real possibility, to be completely honest with you. But it's an interesting thing to talk about, an interesting situation. He's definitely a good NBA mind. I don't agree with a lot of the stuff that he says. A lot of NBA fans don't agree with a lot of the stuff that he says, but he's definitely a very, very good NBA mind. So it's definitely a decent interview. Good shot in the dark for the Charlotte Hornets. I mean, they need to try something. They're deep into a rebuild, and it doesn't seem like they're going to be very competitive anytime soon. So it'll be interesting to see who they bring in as their head coach in this upcoming season. So jumping over from that, the NBA playoffs are deep into the mix right now. All 8 series are fully underway. We should pretty much throughout this week have the results of every series. I think by our next episode next week, we'll pretty much have at most 1 or 2 game 7s left, and that's pretty much it. But I think that a lot of the series are going to be told this week, and I mean, with the way that some of these series are going, I don't think there's going to be too many game sevens. A lot of these series have already been determined in a lot of ways, especially 3 of the 4 series in the Western Conference. I think have pretty much been determined, including the one that we'll lead off with. That the Oklahoma City Thunder right now lead the New Orleans Pelicans 3-0. Their next game is Monday at 9:00, which will be game 4. OKC has completely dominated this series. OKC is the number 1 seed, obviously. New Orleans ended up being the 8th seed. They hosted the play-in, ended up losing to the Lakers. Then they ended up playing the Sacramento Kings to see who got the 8th seed. They ended up winning that game, but they've looked completely uncompetitive throughout this series with the Thunder. They don't have Zion Williamson. Zion got hurt in a play-in game and is going to miss this entire series. They were hoping that he could be back later in the playoffs if they ended up advancing, but that's definitely not going to happen. OKC has just dominated throughout the series. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is just clearly the best player on the floor throughout this entire series. It's been a complete dominance. Jalen Williams played well. Josh Giddey has even played well. Josh Giddey had a couple of good seasons to start his NBA career, but has been very up and down, throughout this season. Obviously, you had all the interesting off-the-court stuff going on with Josh Giddey, and he basically became a meme throughout this season. But his performance in Game 3 was great. He had 21 points, 8 rebounds, and 6 assists in 31 minutes in New Orleans, too. So OKC is going to have a chance to finish off the sweep in New Orleans on Monday. I think the biggest disappointment throughout this series has been Brandon Ingram. I mean, Ingram has been absolutely terrible for the Pelicans throughout this playoff run. In the 3 games against OKC, he's had 12 points, 18 points, and 19 points. And with Zion Williamson out, he becomes their star player, and he's done absolutely nothing. Him and CJ McCollum. CJ McCollum has not played well at all either. He's shot terribly. He had 20 points in Game 1, had 15 points Game 2, 16 points in Game 3. So, I mean, Game 3, Brandon Ingram had 19 points, CJ McCollum had 15 points, and you have no Zion Williamson. There's no chance you're going to win. It's absolutely abysmal, the kind of performance that Ingram has had. And I think that we can tell a lot about who Brandon Ingram is as a player from this performance. We've all seen great scoring seasons from him and moments where it looks like that he was going to become this star player and this great number 2 behind Zion Williamson. He's just never taken that step. And every time Zion has gone down and he's been entrusted to be the number 1 option, he's completely failed. Last season was a huge example. Zion missed practically the entire season with the same exact Pelicans roster, and they finished well under 500, didn't make the playoffs, and did terrible. And then Zion played practically this entire season, and they ended up sitting at the 5 and 6 seed for the majority of the season, got kicked down to the play-in tournament very late, but could very well have been a 5 or 6 seed instead of the 8 seed that they ended up with after choking at the end. But it just goes to show you that Brandon Ingram, not a number 1 player. CJ McCollum's probably just getting older, been a little bit less efficient. I mean, he's been through some many battles in the playoffs throughout his days in Portland as well, being Damian Lillard's number 2 option. Has made it as far as the Western Conference Finals when the Trailblazers made it there against Golden State several years back. But I think Brandon Ingram has been the biggest disappointment for the Pelicans. And it'll be interesting to see what the Pelicans do this offseason, too. They got a bunch of young guys on their roster. Trey Murphy, who has slotted in well to a starting position since Zion went out. Got Herbert Jones, who's become a good player. Jordan Hawkins coming off the bench, who's become a good player. They got a lot of good young players and a few veterans. So it'd be interesting to see if they try to enter a rebuild or move on from some of these veterans that they have. See if they can get anything for Ingram or CJ McCollum, who still have some years left on their contracts as well. That'll be interesting to see. But OKC has completely dominated and should be headed to the second round. And then the 4 versus 5 matchup, the Mavericks versus the Clippers. Mavericks currently lead the series 2-1 at the time of this recording. And news just came out that Kawhi Leonard is going to be out for Game 4 with knee inflammation. Kawhi shockingly played, I think it was 72, 73 games this season, something we haven't seen from him since he was on the Spurs years ago. He misses so much time throughout the season, but he played practically this entire year. And we also got a nice reminder of how good of a player Kawhi Leonard is when he's actually playing. He ended up making the All-Star team. He was a finalist for some of the defensive awards. Probably could be named to one of the All-NBA teams, might be an All-NBA third team type of player. So when he plays an entire season, he is a fantastic player. But the injuries just piled up, and the fact that he played the entire season, his knee has been bothering him. He was outspoken about that before the playoff series, saying that his knee has just not felt good for a while, and now the inflammation has settled in, and it could be a good chance that he misses the entire series. And the Mavericks already lead 2-1. They have a chance to go up 3-1 Sunday night. So I think that this is very, very worrisome for the Clippers. Both games 1 and 2 were very close. They split both of those games. Then the Mavs completely dominated Game 3. Luka ended up having 22 points, 10 rebounds, 9 assists. Kyrie Irving had 21 points and 6 assists. Luka has had 33 points, 32 points, and 22 points in the 3 games. Kyrie had 31 points in Game 1, 23 and 21 in the last 2 games. So the two of them, Luka and Kyrie, have become probably the best scoring duo in the NBA. I think it's safe to say best offensive duo in the NBA this past season, and they've completely dominated. And they have a huge opportunity to go up 3-1 and to wipe out the Clippers once again. And there's a lot of interesting things that are going to go down this offseason for the Los Angeles Clippers. A lot of questions that they're going to need to answer. Paul George is set to be able to become a free agent. Kawhi Leonard was just extended. They're stuck with him, but they're going to have a lot of guys who are free agents. Tyronn Lue has done a good job coaching that team, but will he be on to a different situation? We'll be going over that is actually a very, very good segue to lead us into the Timberwolves versus Suns series. Speaking of Tyronn Lue, I'll get to why that's a very good segue in a minute. But the 3-6 series, the Timberwolves lead the Suns 3-0. This has been a shocker for me, to be honest with you. There's been absolutely no fight from the Phoenix Suns. They're fully healthy too. Bradley Beal, Kevin Durant, and Devin Booker have all been healthy, and they just have not performed well at all. And the Timberwolves have shown that their young star power has been really good. Anthony Edwards has had an amazing series. Karl Anthony Towns has played great. Rudy Gobert is showing you why he's probably going to win his 4th Defensive Player of the Year award this season. And they have a very thin roster as well. They practically only play 7 guys. They have their starting 5 of Conley, Edwards, Anderson, Towns, and Rudy Gobert. And coming off the bench, they have McDaniels, they have Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and they have Naz Reid. So should say 8 guys that they practically play, and that's pretty much it. No one else really plays very much for this Timberwolves team. They have a very thin roster. Chris Finch likes the roster more on the thinner side, and they've been rolling with that, and it's been efficient. They're up 3-0, obviously, over the Suns, in what I think is a pretty big shocker. I thought that this was a series that the Suns could potentially win due to the Timberwolves' inexperience in the playoffs. But this Timberwolves team is proving why they're the 3 seed in the Western Conference, why they were sitting at number 1 in the Western Conference for a good chunk of the season. And the segue from Tyronn Lue that I was getting into is if the Clippers decide to move on, try to clear house a little bit, Tyronn Lue maybe gets let go. There's a lot of rumors that are coming around that if the Suns end up losing this series, they're already down 3-0, they might get swept tonight, Sunday night. Frank Vogel might get fired, and after just 1 year with the Suns. That's a highly likely situation that's going to happen if they end up losing this series, which they're probably going to do. So if Frank Vogel gets fired, Tyronn Lue to the Phoenix Suns, does that become more of an interesting appeal? Does he leave the Clippers to go to the Suns? The Suns wanted him this last head coaching search when Monty Williams was fired. They ended up missing out on him. He decided he wanted to stay with the Clippers, but it makes things very, very interesting to see what kind of goes down. Does he jump in and try to become? I mean, if Frank Vogel ends up getting fired, the Suns, there's going to be a lot of head coaches that are going to be after the Suns' job to try to take this big three and win with this big three. Of Bradley Beal, Kevin Durant, and Devin Booker. All three of them are under contract for a while. They're all getting older. So this team is kind of like leveled out to be what they are for the next several years. Nobody's going to jump ship, all that kind of stuff. So they'll work towards next season, but the head coaching search is going to be very interesting for the Phoenix Suns. So the Minnesota Timberwolves can finish off the sweep tonight. And then the final series in the Western Conference is the number 2 ranked Denver Nuggets leading the number 7 ranked Los Angeles Lakers 3-1 currently. This series has been complete dominance from the Nuggets, very similar to the Thunder versus Pelicans series. The Lakers have led at halftime in all 4 games now in this series, and the Nuggets lead 3-1. It was the first time the Nuggets were up 3-0 before the Lakers ended up winning on Saturday night, but it was the first time ever that a team led at halftime in the first 3 games of a series, and we're down 3-0. So that just proves to you how the Lakers have just not been able to finish games. They play a strong 24 minutes, but the last 24 minutes have just not been good. And basically, outside of LeBron and AD, they haven't had much scoring. LeBron has definitely taken a step backwards. He's not nearly the dominant player that he used to be. Anthony Davis has stayed relatively healthy this year, but they haven't gotten much from Hachimura. They haven't gotten much from Reeves. D'Angelo Russell completely disappeared for a couple of games in this series. So, everybody thought that this was a rematch of the Western Conference Finals last year. The Nuggets completely dominated the Lakers, winning the series in 5 games last year. They'll probably end up doing the same this year. This series is going to go back to Denver now for Game 5, and this will practically end the Lakers season. And the biggest question, if this does end up ending the Lakers season, is what's going to happen with Darvin Ham. Is he still going to be the answer? He's had 2 not so great years as the head coach of the Los Angeles Lakers now after they let Frank Vogel go. What happens with him? What happens with LeBron? LeBron can opt out with his player option. Does he follow Bronny James somewhere? What kind of goes on with that? And if LeBron ends up leaving, what does he end up doing? What do the Lakers end up doing with the roster? Makes things very, very interesting. But one thing I'm very excited for, and we'll be previewing it probably in the next episode, and we'll probably know if this is a definite to happen or not. Timberwolves versus Nuggets in round 2 is going to be very, very interesting. That's got the makings to be a really, really fun series. I'm excited to see that. I really hope that the Timberwolves can finish off the sweep and the Nuggets can finish off the Lakers on Monday and pretty much just give us a set Timberwolves versus Nuggets in the second round. That's going to be exciting to go over, and it's going to be exciting to watch for sure. Then the Eastern Conference, we got a couple more matchups that are a little bit more intense than the Western Conference. Leading off with the Celtics versus the Heat. The Celtics lead the Heat 2-1. They were able to win Game 3 on Saturday, but the Heat, without Jimmy Butler, still have not had him for the first 3 games of the series. Probably won't have him for the entire series. They were able to steal a win in Boston in Game 2. The Celtics came back in Miami to win Game 3. So makes things a little bit interesting. Obviously, this is also a rematch of the Eastern Conference Finals from last year, where the Heat ended up knocking off the Celtics and making it all the way to the NBA Finals, where they lost to the Nuggets. But this Heat team is definitely a little bit more beaten up than the previous ones. This is definitely a tough matchup, though, for the Celtics to get in the first round as an 8 seed. They would have much rather had the Sixers, I'm sure, or even the Magic or one of those teams to end up being the 8 seed, but they got stuck with the Heat. This series is going to definitely be interesting as it wraps up. We're going to have Game 4. Is going to set to be to tip off on Monday. Game 4 will, of course, be also in Miami. So that'll definitely make things interesting. Can the Heat tie up the series, kind of put a little bit more pressure on the Celtics? That's going to be so interesting to see. I think that it's going to be very difficult for the Heat to be able to knock off the Celtics. Obviously, the Celtics 64-18 this season had a completely incredible year where they were clearly the most dominant team in the NBA throughout the entire season. There's not even a debate about that. I don't think you can debate that at all. But the Celtics definitely should be able to come back in this series. And then the 4 versus 5 seed. This has been a very interesting series, but a very boring series, I will say at the same time. Cavs versus Magic. They're tied 2-2 right now. The Magic blew out the Cavs once again, just like they did in Game 2. It's been a very weird series. All 4 games have not been relatively entertaining. They just haven't at all throughout this entire series. The Magic's 2 wins have been complete blowouts, including Game 4, where they completely dominated and blew out the Cavaliers. Both of these teams are just whoever ends up winning the Celtics versus Heat series, even if the Heat end up somehow knocking off the Celtics, which I don't think is going to happen, but if that were to happen, I think either one of those teams are going to knock off the Cavs or the Magic in round 2. I think that's just a given. I think the Cavs and Magic are just 2 weak teams. They hit big slumps towards the end of the season and just never really bounced back from that especially when it came to the Cavaliers. I mean, the Magic are still an up-and-coming team. They're just showing signs of being a little bit too young. Jalen Suggs had a decent series. Paolo Banchero. I mean, for the vast majority of the players on the Magic team, this is their first ever playoff series. So they have not experienced the NBA playoffs. But everyone besides Joe Ingles, pretty much, and Markelle Fultz, who are the 2 veterans on the team, haven't experienced the playoffs. The Wagner brothers, the Paolo Banchero, Cole Anthony, Jalen Suggs, all the rest of them really have not seen any playoff action in their careers before this. This series has just been completely interesting. It's been there hasn't been really any close games. The first 2 games of the series, Cleveland won at home. They won 97-83 in Game 1, and they won 96-86 in Game 2. And then the last 2 games in Orlando have been complete blowouts. Orlando won by almost 40 points in Game 3, and then they won by 23 points in Game 4. So it's been complete dominance from the home team. The Game 5 is going to be headed back to Cleveland. That's going to take place on Tuesday. So this is definitely a series I think that can go 7 games. And by the time of next Sunday, we might still be previewing a Game 7 in this series. But I don't think either of these teams have a legit chance of beating the Celtics or the Heat in the next round. And then the Pacers and Bucks, the 3 versus 6 seed. The Pacers currently lead the series 2-1 at the time of this recording. They lead 2-1. There's going to be both teams will play on Sunday, so we're going to be 1 game behind. They're both slated to play on Sunday, but the Pacers are already up 2-1. The Bucks, the Bucks ended up splitting the first 2 games, which was in Milwaukee. Without Giannis hasn't played at all in this series, probably will not play in this series. Damian Lillard now will not play in Game 4 after getting hurt in Game 3. So down 2-1, they'll be without Giannis and Damian Lillard, and Chris Middleton's going to have to come up big again. He almost single-handedly kept them in the game in Game 3. with his 40-something point performance. He came up huge. But without their two star players, the two guys that they're paying nearly $100 million, near $100 million just for the two of them, are not going to be playing in Game 4. Huge chance for the Pacers to go up 3-1 and bring the series back to Indiana, or bring the series back to Milwaukee and have a chance to either win the series in Game 5 or win the series in Indiana in Game 6. If I think that, going into this series, I was excited. I was excited about this series with how well the Pacers were playing, but I was also excited about the series because I think the Bucks, without Giannis and now without Damian Lillard, I don't have much hope that they're going to end up winning the series. I think that the Pacers, unless they just don't wake up and play a terrible game, they probably should go up 3-1. And we all know that in the NBA, a 3-1 lead is pretty much a death sentence to the team who is down 3-1. Only happened that one time several years ago in the NBA Finals that we all remember, but practically every other series results in the team who's up 3-1 winning the series. And speaking of 3-1 series, the Knicks now lead the Philadelphia 76ers 3-1 after beating them in Game 4. This has been a completely entertaining series. I mean, if you're an NBA fan, I don't care if you hate the Knicks, I don't care if you hate the Sixers. As a diehard Knicks fan, obviously I'm enjoying it, but I don't care if you hate either of these teams. This has just been a completely entertaining series through and through. The Knicks started off the series, first two games at the Garden, won the first two games, went up 2-0. Game 2 ended in a little bit of controversy. A lot of people thought that there should have been some foul calls that got the Knicks bailed out. Dante DiVincenzo had multiple second chance opportunities. There was the timeout that they missed on, all that kind of stuff that a bunch of people kind of were up in arms with. And by a bunch of people, I mean Philadelphia fans. I don't think really anyone else truly cared that much. Most people don't like the Philadelphia teams if it's not a Philadelphia fan anyway. But that kind of went back and forth. And then in my mind, Game 3 kind of evened the score because Game 3, the Sixers ended up winning. And Joel Embiid had several plays that could have been called for flagrant fouls, several plays that could have been called for normal fouls that weren't called. And I think that kind of evened up the series. And then Game 4 was a complete classic through and through. From tip-off to the final buzzer, this game was a complete classic. It was back and forth the entire game. Sixers had the lead for a while. The Knicks ended up coming back and just showed their grit. Jalen Brunson with a 47-point performance. Now the Knicks' all-time leading scorer in playoff history. Absolutely stellar game. Sixers now fall 3-1. Game 5 is headed back to the Garden. And the Knicks will have a chance to end this series in 5 games. And the winner of this series will be taking on the winner of the Pacers versus Bucks series. And, as a Knicks fan, I love the Knicks' chances of making it to the Eastern Conference Finals now. I think that with a banged-up Milwaukee Bucks or with the Indiana Pacers, they have a very, very good chance of beating either of those teams if they're able to move past the Sixers. Obviously, the series is not over. They're up 3-1. It's improbable that the Sixers would win the series, but you can never count it out. Crazier things have happened. So that'll definitely be interesting to see throughout this upcoming week as the rest of the round 1 series will wrap up. So that'll do it for another episode of the 3&D. I want to thank everyone for tuning into the Empty the Bench podcast network for another episode. Once again, make sure you like and subscribe to this channel and follow the social at the 3&D ETB. We'll be putting out content all week in case you missed the entire episode. So make sure you go back, watch the episode. If you missed it, we'll be putting out bits and pieces throughout the week on both the Empty the Bench handle and the 3&D handle. Hope everyone has a great night. Watch plenty of NBA basketball. The round 1 series will be wrapping up. We'll probably have a set round 2 bracket by the next episode, so it's going to be interesting to see. So I hope everyone has a great night. Make sure to like and subscribe to Empty the Bench on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.